Welcome to a new episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library, recorded live in the recording studio at the library in beautiful Winter Park, Florida. In Books and Beyond, we have conversations with writers, musicians, artists, presenters, and other contributors. Most of our guests have appeared live at the Winter Park Library or will be presenting soon. We hope you'll subscribe to the Books and Beyond podcast and that you'll stay up to date with library goings-on at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. I'm Michael Werner, and I'll be your host for our interviews. Enjoy the show. Hello out there, library patrons, readers, and smart people everywhere. Michael Werner here, and welcome to another episode of the Books and Beyond podcast from the Winter Park Library. And I'm here with our guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And the reason I'm sort of hesitating about introducing him, he goes by many names. He's Bob, he's Rob, he's sometimes Ron, he's Doctor, he's Professor, he's Commander, he's Captain. I don't know, he's got a lot of names, but my favorite one is Navy Bob. And so I'm here with Navy Bob, and we'll find out why he's called Navy Bob in just a minute. So Robert Wronska, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael. Such an honor and pleasure to be here.
We're really happy to have you. We're here in the recording studio at the Winter Park Library, which most of you know about from prior episodes. And if you want to use this space, it's open to anybody. You just need to come and take a little orientation class, which you can find in the schedule of events, which is at winterparklibrary.org/events, and you can sign up for an orientation class. Okay, so Bob, Navy Bob, welcome, and glad to have you here. Let's start at the beginning. Where are you from, and prior to your career, and just as a kid, tell us a little bit about your life growing up.
Well, thank you, Michael. So I grew up in Western New York. It was a town, Dunkirk, New York, just about an hour south of Buffalo. So it was definitely cold.
Yeah.
Ignorance was bliss.
And is that in the snow belt?
It was in the snow belt, and so blizzards were not uncommon. And again, ignorance was bliss. We didn't know any better. And Florida was just this beautiful icon that everyone dreamed about vacationing to. And so I ended up joining the Navy after college. I spent 28 years in the nuclear Navy.
Did you go to college specifically with that in mind, or not really?
No. Top Gun. The movie Top Gun was out with Tom Cruise.
Okay.
And I loved that movie, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And like I'm sure every other teenager that was watching that movie at the time, but I didn't have 20/20 vision, and my dreams of being a pilot at the time were diminished because there was no corrective surgery at the time.
Okay.
And so my dreams of being a pilot. So I went to go become a merchant marine sailor. I went to SUNY Maritime. It was in the Bronx. I was going to get my third assistant engineering license and then sail and then see the world that way. But when I was in my senior year...
Were you real curious about foreign lands and travel?
I was. I wanted to do something different, and I did have a love for the sea. And so I knew that joining the Navy was something that was available, but also the Merchant Marine appealed to me. And it was a college friend of mine that introduced me to Maine Maritime, but I ended up going to the SUNY New York State in-state, and it was much closer to my house. But when I was there, one of the recruiters for the Nuclear Propulsion Officer Candidate Program, which 1/3 of all nuclear officers are brought into the nuclear Navy through the NUPOC program, 1/3 through ROTC, and approximately 1/3 from the academy.
Okay.
And so I went to go tour a submarine at the time. Loved the camaraderie.
How old were you about?
I was a senior in college, so I was just about 22 years old.
Yeah.
And I loved the culture of the submarine force. It was just you were a part of protecting the country. You were part of national security, and you were going on submarine missions that were vital to national security, just like the movie Hunt for Red October. Hunt for Red October was out. And so my dreams were to do that. And so I joined
Was that the movie with Sean Connery?
That was with Sean Connery and One Ping Only.
Okay.
And the CEO, and then fast forward, I talk about this in my book, It was basically a chronological memoir of my life and how I got here and how I learned great leadership and bad leadership. But one of the pinnacle events of my career was being the captain of the USS Texas. And this was a new Virginia class submarine, state of the art when I took over command. And it reminded me a lot of what the Hunt for October movie was. Just like the Sea of the Dallas that tracked, foreign submarines. I did that on the USS Texas. So then I was here in nuclear power school as a student back in 1991, but then I came back as an instructor to teach new officers, new nuclear officers, reactor dynamics and core characteristics as an instructor from 95 to 98 when Baldwin Park was a Navy base. So we loved the area so much.
Days, yeah.
Loved the area so much. We just wanted to put our roots down here again in Winter Park, Orlando, Florida area.
And then when did you come back to Winter Park?
So I retired from the Navy in 2018.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why that was. And in the book, it talks about why I retired. My daughter.
And I'm remiss here, Bob. Let me just mention it. We're here talking about your book, and I didn't even mention the title. It's called Beyond the Sea: Leading with Love from the Nuclear Navy to the White House and Healthcare. So we'll get more into that in a minute, but I just want to mention the title.
Absolutely, Michael. And so in the book, it talks about my daughter would have gone to 3 different high schools if I were to continue in the Navy. And it was time. It was one of the best books that I read was When to Call a Necessary Ending. It was by Henry Cloud, and it was time to call a necessary ending. I love the Navy. I love the people, but the sacrifices that my family had, especially my daughter, who had gone to 3 different high schools, it wasn't worth pursuing.
She had already gone to 3 different high schools.
No, she was a freshman in high school in Hawaii, where we ended up finishing our career. But when they wanted me to go down, my next assignment was in D.C., and it was a job that I would have taken senators and congressmen around. Wouldn't spend much time at home, but that was only a 2-year job, and no guaranteed I'd stay in the same location, which means my daughter most likely would have gone to 3 different high schools.
I see.
And so we wanted to make one more move for her to minimize transitions, to maximize her success. And that's where I reached out to somebody who lived in Orlando, Florida, and we'll get to that in a little bit, how I got here.
Yeah, okay. Good. So you're in school studying to go to sea. What was it that attracted you specifically to submarines and submarine life?
So, like I said, when I toured, so we toured 2 different vessels. One was an aircraft carrier, which is nuclear powered, and it seemed it was big. If you look at the number of sailors on an aircraft carrier, it didn't have that family feeling to me. It was very impressive. If you've ever been on an aircraft carrier,
I have been, yeah.
It's just amazing.
How many sailors are on an aircraft carrier, approximately?
At the time, I believe it was like 4,000 sailors.
You're kidding.
So there's
wow.
Massive. And so
Didn't know that.
In the same trip to entice us to join the nuclear Navy, they toured us on board a submarine. And it was a stark difference. On a submarine, typically, it's 130 to 140, depending on the class of ship. But when you deploy, you can have up to 150, 160 people. And when we were toured by one of the sailors, it was clear that he had pride in what he did. There was a sense of family and love, and there was a sense of mission accomplishment. And with combination of the Hunt for October movie out, it really sold me of joining the nuclear Navy. I didn't know what I was going to get into.
Sure.
But I look back on it, it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
And were you married at the time?
So at the time, I was in college. I was not, but
Okay.
I started to date my wife, Stephanie, who went to a neighboring. She went to a neighboring town right next to mine in Fredonia, just right next to Dunkirk, and we started dating my junior year, her sophomore year, and we dated long distance. She went to Fredonia College, and then She was a year behind me. And then when we moved to my first duty assignment, we got married in Kings Bay, Georgia.
Okay.
So we've been married now since 1992, and we're happily married for over 30 years now. And have
Congratulations.
two beautiful children, Sophia, which is my daughter, and my son, Zachary.
So, I mean, that's a huge commitment. I mean, the kids don't have a choice, but your wife had a choice, or your future wife had a choice. So, did she buy in right from the beginning, or was she just went in blind, or what?
Yeah, she's wonderful. She had faith that this was the right thing, and I'll tell you, it was scary. And I give the wives and family members incredible credit to be able to do this. And if you think about it, I spent 8 years of my life underwater, not consecutively, throughout my 28-year career.
So, if you add up all the deployments, it's 8 years underwater.
Right. So 8 years
Wow.
of my life, of my submarine time, was underwater, away from family members. And the submarine force is unique compared to pretty much any other service. Um, Not like the SEALs or Special Operating Forces where they
Right.
would go, but the submarine forces is known for their stealth. And so we don't typically communicate with outside people as we're doing missions. So my wife was basically raising our children on her own. And one great example is that when I took over the command of the Texas, we went underneath the North Pole and certified that ship for Arctic operations. And at the time, my daughter had a lazy eye and she required surgery. And so this is the first time she was going underneath anesthesia as a 3-year-old child,
Oh, it's
which
3.
was
Wow.
scary.
Sure.
And so I didn't know, didn't get any information for probably 2.5 or a month and a half. And so, she had to do this all on her own, didn't have the support. And so, the families and spouses and supporting the military, they're truly American heroes.
Yeah. I can see that. I can sense it in your voice too.
Yeah.
I mean, what appreciation goes out to the families, of course. So okay, so you're in the service. What were the jobs you had prior to becoming commander of a submarine?
So the first submarine I was on was a ballistic missile submarine, West Virginia, and that was where I had a junior officer tour, which various roles of becoming a leader, and to qualify specific watch standards such as engineering officer of the watch. You're in charge of the reactor plant and
Okay.
the engine room. But I also qualified officer of the deck, which you were in charge of the entire ship, both in port and at sea. And so that was my first duty assignment. And there, we'll get into the book a little bit more, but that was my first experience of a toxic leader. His nickname was MFB. He was.
I can guess what the MF is.
Yeah, we won't get into that. You'll have to wait to hear it. But the retention was terrible. Everyone was so fearful to speak up. Everyone was walking on eggshells. And
The crew you're talking
oh,
about.
the
Yeah.
crew,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there was no critical thinking. They were just worried about getting in trouble, and the psychological safety wasn't there. And what first indication was that leadership had directly correlated to safety and performance of the ship. This ship had a main engine casualty. Basically, one of the watchstanders made an error. They shifted lube oil coolers without oil in it, and it basically put this big slug of air throughout the main engines doing maximum speed, and it caused significant damage to the main engines of this $2 billion ballistic missile submarine that took this national asset offline for over 3 months.
Wow.
And I look back at it, we think it's because of the errors that someone just didn't follow orders or just didn't have the right capability. But looking back at this, as I wrote this book, the culture of the crew and that type of leadership was directly responsible for the safety and the retention and the well-being of that crew. So that was my first indicator of why this leadership just doesn't work. And one day I came home to my wife and I said, it's in the book. I said, you don't let me stay in one more day than I have to in the Navy, because it was a 5-year commitment. And she said, okay. We started looking for other jobs. And then MFB left. It's time to leave. He should have left a long time ago. but then we had this really loving executive officer, second in command, that really nurtured me and took care of me. His name was Mike McKinnon, and it was touch and go if we were going to continue on with the Navy. And because of him, there's no doubt I would not have been in the Navy. And we continued our career after that.
Uh-huh. Well, which is a great segue into the sort of the subtitle of your book, which is the book is Beyond the Sea. We're here with Robert Ronska, Captain Bob or Navy Bob, which we'll get into where that name comes from in a moment, with Navy Bob, and the subtitle is Leading with Love. So, and I think we talked about this briefly prior to the episode today. That just seems so contrary to everything I think about when I think about the military of any love and military don't go together to me. So, talk to us about that.
Sure, and this is why it's really was eye-opening. I wrote this book not knowing why I wanted to write this book, but I did want to share my experiences and pay it forward to others to really document what is great leadership and why is there poor leadership and the impacts of having both. And what really sparked my interest to begin with is being in the nuclear Navy. The nuclear Navy is the highest safety standards. For over 75 years, we've never had a nuclear reactor accident with highly enriched uranium, the same uranium that's in Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. And for over 75 years, with 20-year-old sailors operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors, we've never had a reactor accident. And so
that's amazing, but it's also a little scary too, isn't it?
It is, and it's incredible, and it's the culture of the nuclear Navy founder. His name is Admiral Rickover. That's a whole nother subject, but it dawned on me that because of these tight, rigid safety standards, that every single sailor goes to the same leadership schools, the same technical schools. They use the same manuals and procedures and equipment. And so how is it that everything could be so formalized and standardized, and yet you have such a diverse performance across different submarines, like MFB and others? I would walk on. I rode almost every single submarine in the fleet in my career. It was just one job specifically, as a Commodore and as a prospective commanding officer instructor. And I could tell you within 5 minutes of walking on board if this was a great ship or if this ship had problems, just how the culture and the crew interacted. And that was my indicator that the culture and leadership had a significant role into the well-being and safety standards and performance of those crews. And I didn't have academic research at the time, so it really sparked my interest. And so when I left the Navy, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I spent 5 years in healthcare, and it was exactly the same. I'd walk in one unit, a similar unit, and I wanted to sign up. I wanted to say, how can I join this team? I felt loved, I felt cared for, and the performance correlated with that. And patient satisfaction scores, patients were happy. But then I would walk on a similar unit at a different hospital in the same hospital system. I wouldn't let any of my relatives go anywhere near this unit. Wow. And it had to deal with the culture. And so then I joined, I went to Rollins College in the executive doctorate of business administration course. And I recommend this completely. It opened up my world to the academics of why does this phenomenon occur? Like my theory was it had to do with leadership and culture, but then I could go into the academic research to validate and see what actual research is out there in the business and industries to validate this. And when I came across this one theory, the theory was called leader-member exchange. I said, that's it.
When you were in graduate school?
When I was at Rollins College. Yeah. And the father of this has been doing this for over half a century. His name is Dr. Grain. And Dr. Grain is the father of LMX. And leader-member exchange, what it is a leadership theory that looks at the relationship strength between team members and employers. And what he has found over a half a century of research, and it is so much data out there, is that if you improve the relationships between anyone in your organization, the outcomes go up. And why I came up with love is that you need to define what this was. And if you look at in the religious world, love is pronounced, right? It just talked
Sure,
about all
sure.
the time. But in the business community and the industry, it's not.
No.
And so as I was
It's actually
reflecting,
maybe even a sign of weakness if you hear that used.
it is,
Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
and it's
Love,
time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really time to really highlight this. And believe me, love is tough love as well. Holding people accountable and so forth is a sign of love. And so I don't want to misconstrue this that it's all just love. Let's get together and just sit around a campfire and hold hands and sing. It's not. It's if you love somebody, you're going to hold those people accountable. But first and foremost, as a leader, you're going to look yourself in the mirror to see what you did to make sure that you gave everyone the right tools, the right equipment to be able to succeed. And so one of the things that really why I fell in love with this leader member exchange theory is if you look at all the definitions, the definition that I best can describe love in a religion is sacrificially giving of oneself for the benefit of others. Just like, for example, if a mother has a child fall into a river, that mother, without any hesitation, will jump in to save that child.
Right.
She could drown. She doesn't know how the currents. We don't know if there's alligators in there, whatever. But the mother, without hesitation, jumps into that river to save that child. How do you define that? You define it as love because she sacrificially gave herself for the benefit of others. And so it's talked a lot in every single religion as love is the cornerstone of leadership. But when you go out to the business world, it's really not discussed. But I found it in this leader-member exchange. If anything that you have to prove or to discuss a theory, there's scales, there's questions to validate. What is the strength of the relationship? And one of the questions in this LMX7, it's a 7-question survey to identify the strength of the relationship between two individuals or a team, is that would you bail your coworker out at the cost of your own? Or would you have the back of your subordinate at the cost of your own? And if you look at the definition of love in the biblical sense, would you sacrificially give yourself for the benefit of others? It's the same thing. So now we have research in the academic world for over half a century that can explain this relationship. And we know if you want to be a better leader, the research is out there. Sure, if you improve your communication skills, your charisma, or you go on a diet, sure, you're going to be seen as a better leader.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really want to move the needle far beyond of concentrating on yourself, concentrate on the relationships with your team members. What the data shows is that if you really want to move productivity, reduce burnout, reduce stress, increase your chances or becoming a legendary leader, don't concentrate on yourself. Concentrate on the relationships of those people that you work with.
So that must have been a bingo, eye-opening moment for you when you came across this research. I mean, it was like, wow.
My gosh. And so the person, just to give you some more history, is Dr. Greg Marshall was my chair, and he was he taught us the first class, and he talked about in the academic world, what is a theory? And so basically he goes on to explain, which I had no exposure in this before, but one of the example he gives is that you have the good old boy talking about, every time a rooster crows, he theorizes the sun will rise, right? So he saw a rooster crow, the sun rise. He said, well, good old boy network, this is why the sun rises. And so he said, no, what the academic world does is really validate that through statistical analysis. And what he found, through this theory of every time a rooster crows that the sun rises wasn't true because there was other things that were influencing that. And so that's where having a theory and really validating and this type of leadership is through statistical analysis. We know this works. And we can go on to why is this so important today. And I teach at UCF leadership and the Master's of Healthcare Administration.
That's University of Central Florida here in Orlando.
It is. So I've dug into research and leadership books, not only at Rollins College, but now as an instructor. And he is known, Dr. Grain, as he's legendary in the academic world, and he's in the textbooks. And why I think this is so important and why this is so needed is because this generation is changing. If you look at this generation, the millennials and Gen Xers or Gen Zs, McKinsey did this study. McKinsey looked at the great attrition and great resignation. And what they found that this generation, it's not necessarily about how much money they make. What they want to feel the most in the workplace is to feel valued and feel loved.
Very interesting.
And so if we don't shift to this type of leadership style, transformational leadership is wonderful, but, people are not going to follow people today because they have a dream. They're not going to, also servant leader. I know that this leadership theory is the answer for leaders today.
Oh, wait, what is that? That must be a sign. That's a sign that we're going to play, Bob, if you're willing, Navy Bob. We're going to play rapid fire Q&A. This is a little chance for us to get to know you as a person, and I'm going to throw some questions at you. Are you willing to play?
Sure, absolutely, Michael.
Okay, so let's give it a shot. I'm just going to, and if you would, keep your answers to just a couple of words or less than a sentence. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to shuffle these up, and well, interestingly, the first question is, what's your favorite movie?
Hunt for Red October.
Do you have a favorite saying or quote?
My old high school football coach, this is in the book, either you get better or you get worse. You don't stay the same.
Okay. What's a character trait you admire in others?
I think integrity and care.
Integrity and
caring.
And caring
for
okay.
for
Which
another.
Relates very closely to the bleeding with love,
Yes,
doesn't it?
yeah, absolutely.
What's something they don't teach in school but should?
I think financial awareness, right? I think how to manage checkbooks, spending, and investment. I think that's something that we could really use today.
Thank you. I don't know why my phone keeps going off here. I put it on silent mode, and it's not working
popular,
for me here.
Michael.
Yeah. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self, or your 18-year-old self, or a kid self?
I think have more empathy for yourself and stop being so hard on yourself if you make a mistake.
Okay. And what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Did you?
Yes. Top Gun was out, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, no more than anything.
Okay, it's time for dinner. What's your favorite meal?
Oh, I love pizza.
Pizza.
Pizza, especially if you ever done a Royal Caribbean cruise. They're the pizza. I just love their pizza.
Any particular kind?
Just pepperoni, whatever's available, and just love pizza.
Okay.
It's not good for you, but I love pizza.
Sure. We've all got those. What's the best advice you ever received?
The best advice is, again, from my high school football coach. He had another great quote, which was, if you hang around with dirty dogs, you're going to catch fleas.
Okay, good one. Okay, we know you bought into the Navy from an early age, into a career in the service. If you hadn't gone into that area, what do you think you might have become or have done in a career?
I think I would have been a merchant marine, something in the maritime industry, to be able to ship out as well.
Okay. So did you give up on your football career early on?
Yes.
You said you were in high school football.
I was. I played it in college for a little bit.
Okay.
But yes, I gave up on football.
Who's your favorite author? Fiction.
Fiction, I would say I met her, and it was Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was an incredible honor to meet her.
How did you get a chance to meet her?
So I used to carry the nuclear codes for president.
Which we'll get into in a minute. I want to talk to you more about
football.
that. Yeah,
and so she was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and I was speaking for that ceremony, and she asked me where the nearest restroom was, and I had the honor to escort her to the nearest restroom.
That's a good story. How about nonfiction author?
So I think Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, is my favorite.
Okay. Okay, you live here in Florida. You love Florida. You came to Florida because you loved it. If you didn't live here, where might you live?
So I think I really enjoyed Hawaii, and so the weather is beautiful.
Beautiful out there, yeah.
But I think taking all the attributes of Florida and how wonderful Florida is, how much there is to do, cost of living, I would pick Florida over Hawaii. But Hawaii would be a second runner-up by.
Gotcha. I think I already know the answer to this because you tipped it off earlier. If this food item had no calories, what would you eat every day?
It'd be pizza.
It'd be pizza every day. Okay. Is there anything? Last question for you here. Where would you like to go that you haven't been?
The moon.
The moon.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, we're probably not in your lifetime. That could happen.
I could. I would love to go explore the moon.
Bob, thanks for being a willing participant in the rapid fire Q&A. Appreciate it. Okay. Let's get back to our story here. And the big question I have for you, and I think a lot of people, because we've referred to you as Navy Bob, tell us about that. Where did that come about, and why are you Navy Bob?
So one of the distinct honors that I had was I was selected to be the naval aide to President George W. Bush. And I've just finished my executive officer tour on board USS La Jolla. And I was asked to interview for this position. And there was 7 other people interviewing for this prestigious naval aide position to carry the nuclear codes, the football, in charge of his security. You're in charge of all the military assets when you're on the road, basically coordinating Air Force One, Marine One, food service, and you're working working closely with the medical, the Secret Service, and White House communications, and so on. So when I was selected for the job, I just started out, and the personal aide, his name was Jared, said, would anyone like to go over the weekend because he was away to help reconstruct some bike trails at Beltsville. It was where he would ride his bike on the weekends.
President Bush would ride his bike.
Where we'd ride his bike. And I knew how important it was for him to release his stress on riding bikes and how much he enjoyed it. And I said, absolutely, I'll be happy to help. So after we finished doing some bike maintenance at Beltsville, Jared called President Bush on our way home, and there was only 4 or 5 of us in a car, and I could, hear what he was saying. He said, gave him an update on the bike status and the days, any other news on the day, and he said, who helped you? And he says, well, Jim, Jared, Tom, and at the last thing he says, Bob, and I can hear, Bob who? Because I just started out. He didn't really know who I was.
Right.
And Jared, the personal aide, says, Navy Bob. Oh, Navy Bob. And that's how I got the name. It stuck, and that's where I will forever be known as Navy Bob.
And that's what you use today. I mean, that's basically your not your logo, but your byline.
It is. And he dubbed, he would give nicknames for everybody. Not everybody, but, this is where in the book it talks about his leadership style. I go behind the scenes. I don't talk about the political arena. I talk about how he treated people. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that at that level, he treated people with love. So if you want to see an inside, like how he treated people, outside the press, it really describes it in the book.
Do you think that's something that people can learn? I mean, because I know sometimes that's an innate thing. You see people just naturally fall into that. But you think people can learn that?
Absolutely. So also, there was a big question when I was doing research. There was a study about DNA. Like some people have DNA that they're more likely to be better leaders.
Yeah.
But some of them have this binary, like you are or you're not. And what they found in the research, it's not true. You can learn leadership. Yes, depending on your DNA, you might have an easier time doing it, but it doesn't matter your DNA, your upbringing. You can learn effective leadership. And so one of the things that in this book, what really can help people, it really portrays and it gives examples, practical examples of what great leadership is and leading with love and incredible outcomes, but it also gives multiple examples of bad leadership. So if you have a leader, right, that you can't approach them and to say, hey, you're not leading well, right? You can give them this book and say, oh, I've read this great book. Please read it, because I've had several people come to me, in initial reviews to say, Bob, I didn't realize I was doing that. I was acting like MFB sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Or I didn't realize, or I should have done this to be able to more appreciate my team members. And he says, since I read your tools and how you led, it really has changed my mindset of how I'm going to lead.
Yeah, I think there's this impression, and myself having been in business for decades, I think there's this impression that to be an effective leader, you have to be a hard guy. You have to be you have to be, you got to put that fist down and constantly driving and driving and driving.
Yep, and it's the Machiavellian. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And especially in this generation, we talked about, and if you look at, a hospital system that I worked at, they were, the retention rate went from 17% to up to almost 34%. And that cost of that hospital system was an additional $400 million per year of extra costs because of turnover. Mm-hmm. And what they say is when you have a nurse leave, it's like taking a Mercedes-Benz C-Class and driving it into a lake. And so that leadership is driving away your talent. And it's affecting psychological safety, it's affecting transparency, and all these affect productivity. And so this business community needs to really address this type of leadership. And they have to be compassionate and lead with love to keep top talent. And the results are remarkable. There's no doubt in my mind that this is what leaders need to learn today.
Okay. And that's a good segue into mentioning, and we just have a couple of minutes left here on our episode, Bob. Tomorrow night, and we're recording this on June 10th. On June 11th, Bob's going to be here at the library. I think we've got a sold-out crowd, but there's a couple spaces left. You can still register and stop by the presentation. It's at 7 o'clock, I think, June 11th, the Winter Park Library in the Edith Bush Theater. It's the main theater in the library. So please come by for that. If you listen to this after that show, well, you've got the podcast here. So and you've got Bob's book, Beyond the Sea. Before we wrap up, anything else you want to mention here? I mean, you've got a lot of stories, and there's a lot of stories in the book, and I encourage everybody to get the book.
Yeah, and so last thing I'll tell you is that my goal is to make this world a better place. And there's no doubt that if everyone led with love and starts spreading this message, we will improve the world globally.
Well, good luck, Bob. Seriously, good luck. I mean, because we need that. There's no question about it.
So you can look to order the book, and it's www.navybob.com.
Okay, and is that the place we would go to if we want to contact you? Anybody wants to?
Yep, you could get emails, get on an email list, give us your email, but you can also order via Amazon or audiobook or Kindle as well.
Okay, and I got to ask you, you've been through the process with the book here, and I know from personal experience it kind of gets in your blood. Do you have another book coming?
I do.
Yeah.
I have a second book coming out in October, and Dr. Coleman, who I worked at AdventHealth with, he's the person that used to be the lead physician for President Obama and was there with President Bush. We have a book coming out, is High Reliability Healthcare, Sharing the Secrets of the Nuclear Navy to Save Patient Lives. And so it's really going to, because I teach at UCF, and so what I'm doing is I don't want to talk about all the things that are great out there as far as patient safety, but clearly the third leading cause of death in this country is due to medical errors behind heart disease and cancer. Clearly we have opportunity, right? If the number of people that are dying every year due to medical errors, they could definitely use the nuclear Navy. And what this book does, it really shares the differences between healthcare, which I was embedded in that culture for 5 years, and my 20 years experience in the nuclear Navy. It really helps leaders to give them the differences between the nuclear Navy and healthcare. And if you look at academic research or what's out there, nuclear Navy has never, ever been discussed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've tapped into something very important here, and I really wish you the best of luck, and hope you'll come back and in a few months or a year or something, and we can see what you've been doing.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Books and Beyond from the Winter Park Library. This podcast would not be possible without the generous help and support from the library staff, and especially from Jeremy Zorn. Jeremy's official title is Public Services Librarian, but he does many things here at the library, including producing this podcast. We can't do this without you, Jeremy. Our theme music is from the song Don't Go by Bovine Joe and the Buffalo Herd. That's Herd spelled H-E-A-R-D. We hope you'll let your friends and others know about this podcast, and that you'll come by the library for one of our offerings, which you can find at winterparklibrary.org/events. That's winterparklibrary.org/events. If you have questions or suggestions for the podcast, or just want to talk about Books and Beyond, please send an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. That's an email to podcast@winterparklibrary.org. Remember that the Winter Park Library promotes the free and open exchange of ideas and does not attempt to control or take responsibility for any opinions that may be expressed in this podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute or imply an endorsement or a reflection of the library's policies or beliefs. This is Michael Werner, wishing you well until our next episode of Books and Beyond.